Welcome to episode 216 of Sports Geek. On this week's episode, I chat with Australian sports pioneer Nick Vanzetti about esports live events.
Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host who listens to podcasts at 1.5 speed. Please tell him if you do too, and he'll speed up next time you meet, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. My name is Sean Callanan, and I do want to know, do you listen to podcasts at 1.5 or even 2 times speed? Myself, I listen to podcasts about 1.5, and then occasionally when I listen to them at normal speed, it all sounds a little bit too slow. And sometimes it is a bit funny when I talk to someone in real life, and they're amazed how slow I speak at times. So let me know. Send me a message. You can do so via email, sean@sportsgeekhq.com, at Sean Callanan, at sportsgeek is how you can find me. As always, you might be listening to this podcast at sportsgeekhq.com or on your favourite podcast platform. Before I get into my chat with Nick Vanzetti from ESL, we recorded that at PAX, a local gaming festival, convention, amalgam of all things gaming and geek culture. It was good to catch up with Nick. Before I do, I love working with podcast listeners. I had one recently call up and say, hey, I've been listening to the podcast. I really should call Sean. If you have that feeling, please take on that urge. I love working with podcast listeners, whether it be on new content initiatives, you want to look at something new, or you want to try something different, you want to look at something for a different audience or a different platform, and you need a new fresh set of eyes or ears, brain in effect, to come up with some new ideas. Happy to discuss how we can help there, or it might be just reviewing your social media and content efforts, helping develop campaigns, either that be for growth of your audience, engagement, helping develop things for sponsors. Obviously, I'll discuss later a really big announcement around the digital to dollars process. We're more than happy to discuss that, how we go about using the digital dollars process to develop both digital audiences, strong content strands or franchises, if you want to call them that, as well as develop revenue. And so all of that work sort of fits in that process, and it's very malleable to work in many different forms. So if you've been thinking, hey, I should reach out, have a chat, please do so. Sean at sportsgeekhq.com. As I mentioned in the opener, I caught up with Nick Vanzetti at PAX. PAX is a gaming convention held here in Melbourne over 3 big days. It pretty much takes over the whole Melbourne Convention Centre, with a showcase of games developers, technology, consoles, PCs, manufacturers in the space, and also a growing part of that festival is esports, and ESL are a big part of that, being both a organizer and a content producer in the space. Nick Vanzetti's been someone that's been in the space for a long time. And it was good to catch up with him to get his point of view on esports as an industry, but then also from that live event aspect that he and his team do so well. So here is my chat with Nick Vanzetti from ESL. We are here at the echoey halls of the Melbourne Convention Centre, far enough away from PAX so we can actually hear ourselves and not overwhelm everybody. I'm here with Nick Vanzetti. I'm not going to say your job title because Dave Harris asked me to get you to say your job title. Nick Vanzetti from ESL. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Sean.
So first of all, what is your job title? Because it has changed a little bit and it's now a little bit longer. Have you got a bigger business card?
I do. So it can be shortened into the letters, but it's the Senior Vice President of Asia Pacific Japan, and Managing Director. So
for ESL?
For ESL. So it's Senior Vice President, Managing Director, Asia Pacific Japan of ESL.
It is. That is a mouthful.
Khaleesi, breaker of chains.
Yeah, exactly. He did. I think he did mention something along those lines. So before we get to where you are now, how did you get your start in the esports scene?
Like I started out as a competitor. I played a little bit too much Halo with some uni mates.
Yep.
Instead of studying, we'd start on a Friday night. We'd drink beers and play System Link. There was no internet online gaming for Xbox at that time. And it turned out to be a lot of fun. And eventually we'd still come over on the Friday nights or the weekends, but we stopped drinking the beer and it would affect our performance and we wanted to win. We got quite competitive. I ended up entering a local tournament and won that, and then also won the national tournament as well. So we just had a love of competitive gaming at that time. Hanging out with mates and the whole team aspect of it was very appealing. And then there's a much longer story as to how we got here. And esports was definitely not a big thing back then. It was just a bit of fun.
So back then and it is a common thing of I was a player, now I'm in the scene. But but people don't know, you're a builder of this scene. So what were those early stages for you, both being a player, but then starting to look at tournaments and leagues and how you got actually into the space as opposed to into gaming, I suppose, is probably how you've answered firstly. Sure.
So, that's how I got into the competitive aspect of play. And I attended a tournament in 2004. It was the World Cyber Games at the time, sponsored by Samsung. And, it was a great experience, but a very small industry.
Yep.
And continued to compete for a few years and went away and had my career, and it was never even a thought that it could be a business at that time.
Yeah.
And
what were you working in?
I did retail store management, EB Games, so within the ecosystem of gaming, but then went into film and television. I was living in Brisbane at the time, and there was a slow turn in the film industry and not enough work.
Yeah.
So I started gaming again many years later in my late 20s. And realised, having a look at the gaming scene again, it had grown so much in the 5 years or so that I'd been away from competing.
Yep.
And there was an opportunity there to help a local event, and the organiser of that event was doing a really poor job. Basics, event 101 failures, booking a 200-person hall for 400 people, that kind of stuff. So I just lent some of my expertise from my previous job roles.
And so you'd had some experience both from a film and TV and setup and that kind of stuff? Yeah,
and it was basic, to be honest, just event management, pulling various stakeholders together to put a community event on. I took over that event and invested a little bit of money, bought some computer monitors and some Xboxes, and it was a fantastic event. It went really well, and I was $5,000 dead on the credit card.
Yep.
And thought, oh shit! Well, I've bought all this equipment, I'll keep going.
Yeah.
And I still have my van left over from the film and TV industry, and started Australia's first circuit for video games, which was myself and a couple of volunteers driving up and down the East Coast, running events in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. And we just did that consistently for 5 years. Every year you'd know that there would be a stop in each one of those cities. Teams would accumulate points in competing, and eventually we'd have a bigger prize pool at the end of the year. And eventually the business side of it in Sydney, the gaming publishers took note of that and asked us to run events for them. They gave us, a sizable budget, a couple of $100,000, and it turns out that you can do a lot more with a bigger budget.
Yeah,
and we're still here today.
Well, that's terrific. So then that leads to you at ESL. How did that come about?
Sure. So I don't want to tell my whole life story,
but I mean, for me, like it is moving quick, but it's like there's certain points in the road that are really important to where you are now and what you've been running, and we'll get to some of the major big events you've been running recently, but it interests me, and hopefully everyone's still listening now. So
I hope so too. So we were sort of doing our own thing as a hobby business, right, for a few years. So between 2009 and 2012, we were running that circuit consistently, and I was still working at the time. And at one point, we were receiving enough attention that I thought maybe there's a possibility that if I moved to Sydney, I was from Brisbane at the time, all the gaming publishers are in Sydney, maybe we'll get more of these opportunities to make make a commercial go of running esports events or even just gaming events. And at the time, I decided, bugger it, I'm going to give up my day job. I moved to Sydney, left my girlfriend of a couple of years in Brisbane while she was still studying. And my best volunteers and comrades from Tamworth, Gold Coast, New Zealand, Adelaide all moved to Sydney. None of us were from Sydney.
Yeah.
And we set up shop in a house there, in a share house, which was horrendous. After you don't want to go back into that environment again. But again, we were too early, so I had to find work, contract workers in events and project management. Did some work for Microsoft Windows and a few different gaming arms before the business really took off. And then around 2014, so after a couple of years in Sydney, we were self-sufficient. I could pay myself a wage. I was starting to pay the other 4 guys who made the trek with me, and we had a small company, and we moved out on our own into an office in Lane Cove. And that was probably the first real moment where we're like, oh, wow, we can actually...
It's an actual business.
We can do this now. We can grow this. And it just snowballed. We got more pitches, more work and more projects. And we went from 5 staff to 10 staff, and now we're about 22 full-time staff today. We have about 30 regular freelancers across the various cities. And when we do the massive events like the Melbourne Esports Open or Intel Extreme Masters in Sydney, we have actually over 140 staff to help put on those events.
So when I first started looking at the esports space, and it's looking at it from the sports business point of view and traditional sports, and seeing it is, and you see all the online activity and all the digital activity, and then what happens really a lot in traditional sports is the live element and the events. Like how important are the events from an esports point of view to get that connectivity of fans, to the games and seeing the players, and because it becomes very similar when you're in a stadium full of fans, whether they're watching a game of tennis, basketball, or whatever, or one of the titles we're seeing here at PAX.
Well, it's interesting because, I started in events, right? It was a very social experience. We didn't just do it to play the game. And that's often a misconception about esports from those not as initiated. Gamers can be very social people, and particularly the esports folks, we're playing a multiplayer game most of the time. There aren't that many 1v1 esports. So there's the team aspect, there's playing against friends or foes, and that rivalry that pops up. And the best way to experience that is in a live event environment. And the spectators' ability is something that, even in our early days, the spectators were the competitors. So I've even seen the evolution of that in the last 10 years to actually surprise myself. I knew that in Korea that there were people crazy enough to be watching this kind of content, but in Australia it wasn't really happening. But I think the continued evolution of gaming as an acceptable culture and just that fan idol experience still exists in esports. Like, oh, how did he pull off that move? That guy's crazy. He's been training for hours. Or people still want to experience that. Which is they
completely translate. When I'm trying to explain what's esports, I'm like, I grew up as a basketball fan and watching all the things that I couldn't do that Michael Jordan can do. Or, what a football fan is looking at Ronaldo and Messi and I can't do that. You've got the same wow factor of fans of esports going, how they do that? And then they go back with their controller, with their PC, whatever they're playing, and try to do it themselves.
Exactly. And as the production values, sponsorship, etc., began to increase in our industry, then as with it becomes the glitz, the glamour, the big stage. So there's that aspirational element as well. You want to perform the same game you play Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday on a big stage in front of an audience. People want to do that.
And so, you mentioned the Melbourne Esports Open, which was held at Rod Laver Arena and Margaret Court. It was the first year this year over a weekend. What were some of the takeaways for that event being year one, and introducing it to a market that hadn't been to a big event like that?
Well, just to probably even to rewind a little bit before we get to the Melbourne Esports Open, because it adds context, right?
Yep.
So before you asked me a question, I didn't answer it about how we joined ESL.
Yeah. Oh, yes, correct.
So,
let's go back there.
And that's my fault, but it links into the Melbourne question. So when our company was essentially bought into by ESL, so we've merged as part of a joint venture with ESL, and for us that was super important because we were becoming a bigger fish in Australia, which is a fairly small pond.
Yep.
And in esports, again, this aspirational storyline, the best competitors in Australia, they want to go overseas, they want to play against the best in the world, or they want to be the best in the world.
Yep.
And working together with ESL meant that
ESL, for the context of everyone, is what?
Sorry, ESL, largest independent esports company in the world.
Yep.
Have offices in the US, Brazil, Latin America, and originally founded in Cologne in Germany, so very strong in Europe. They were acquired themselves by MTG, Modern Times Group, a Swedish media company, and with that became their geo rollout and international expansion. So they came knocking on our door because we had a fairly big presence here in Australia. So working with ESL allowed us to basically create these pathways for players to get to that stage and then qualify into something much bigger. Yep. It also allowed us to bring the existing event properties that they had, mega events, which we describe as an arena event with over 5,000 people, to Australia. So it all kind of started with, me wanting to bring a large-scale mega event to Australia that the Australians could be proud of. They'd never been to one of these before. They're often staying up till 3 a.m. watching the US time zone.
So previously they'd been either watching a stream or of a tournament, whether it's on Twitch or YouTube or whatever they're watching it on, but haven't, and know that there's a live arena component, but they've never felt it. And
Exactly. So once we had secured the Intel Extreme Masters, which is a 14-year running event series with Sydney, that's when we were really able to prove that this concept works. We can get 6,000-7,000 people in an arena to watch esports. They loved it. Turns out the Australian crowd went ballistic. They made a hell of a lot of noise. They were one of the most energetic crowds in global esports. And then from there, it's like, okay, where to next?
Yeah, and that's the buzz. Like that's, there were 60 Minutes were doing reports on that, and you're on there and saying this is what esports is. It helps to go mainstream. People understand, and so then that. Now we can weave it back into Melbourne.
Into Melbourne, that's right. There we go.
So that leads into Melbourne saying, well, hang on. Melbourne and Sydney, for those who are listening internationally, are very competitive cities. They are always comparing events and things like that. And so that Sydney's doing something interesting in this space. Melbourne's gone and put its hand up.
Massive fear of missing out. FOMO was kicking in, I think. It created a lot of buzz, a lot of press around the event in Sydney. And we were working with our great event partners, TG Live, who obviously run massive events here in MCG, like the Brazil-Argentina match. They're doing the basketball next year. So they're having big conversations with the Victorian government all the time about how to drive visitation. And obviously the Victorian government's very forward-thinking in terms of the future and what are going to fill the stadiums in 5-10 years' time. And esports is definitely one of those things. So it just made sense for us to put together a case of a content experience that could allow people to experience an esports event here in Melbourne, but we had to do things a little bit differently to Sydney. So Sydney is like the Formula One of esports. We get the best teams from Brazil, Europe,
it's like an all-star experience.
Correct. We had $300,000 prize money, etc. Turns out that's really expensive to do to get all these players in all the time. Here's a fun anecdote for you. When we get those top teams in, we get one hotel room for the players and we get one hotel room for each team to warm up in. We strip out the hotel beds, the fridges, the everything. We put computers in the hotel room and that's their warm-up room for the entire week. So super expensive. So we can't do that all the time, right? How do we create a massive experience in Melbourne? And also to be a little bit more family friendly, we had a lot more accessible games at Melbourne. We had over 10 different titles, League of Legends, Overwatch, Fortnite, across Rod Laver Arena, Margaret Court Arena. And we wanted to create something that, okay, maybe little Timmy who's 12, 14 years old, plays a bit of Fortnite, it's pretty good. How does he come down, gets to play on Margaret Court Arena, where the Australian Open is? Mum and Dad take a photo. He has the time of his life. Maybe he wins a JB Hi-Fi voucher. And then he goes next door into Rod Laver Arena and sees the best Australian New Zealand competitors in Overwatch. And our goal was really for, little Timmy to have the best time, and Mum and Dad to go, you know what, this esports thing is not that bad. It's not that bad.
So it was funny because, so I went there on the Saturday, and I was amazed is the wrong word, but it was really encouraging to see how many mums and dads were with their young boys and girls that were like checking it out. And it was funny. I was standing there once and hearing I must have been 11 or 12-year-old. He was like complaining to his dad. He was like going, I don't know about all this sound and music and lights and stuff, because he was so used to watching the game, in the streaming environment. But he was loving it, but it was foreign to him because he hadn't, he doesn't have this a football fan can go every week and enjoys the noise.
Well, we definitely want to make sure that we have more of these event experiences so it's not so foreign. We want to get these guys out of the bedroom too, right? But
it wasn't, but it was like he was having a ball, but it was like, I'm just not used to it. It wasn't it wasn't complaint's the wrong word. He wasn't used to it. But it was like, and it's like when most sports administrators say once you get people to a live event, they're like, oh, it's completely different. It
aha moment, right?
Yeah.
And we definitely wanted to create that aha moment in Melbourne. So for us, it was a massive success. All stakeholders happy. And I think when you just we were looking around the precinct and we saw these parents and, we had it was a Sunday of Father's Day. So there were a few dads with their kids there. It was, they were really enjoying it.
Yeah. And the thing was, because there was that, you did have multiple stages, so you could go, I'm going to go watch the main stage, but then you had the multiple stages on Margaret Court and exhibit hall. They had lines around the thing just for kids wanting to play Fortnite again, like that kind of thing. It did give that festival feel that when you go to the Grand Prix or you go to the tennis, or you go to the race, it sort of had that feel. And so I think there's a lot there for years 2, 3, and 4.
Exactly, and that's where we're going. I mean, it was year one. We've got plenty of room to grow. The whole festival experience is what we want to do, and create more content and experiences for people beyond just the pure esports tournament.
So from on the podcast, and I've spoken to a few people in the esports space. Now, admittedly, they've mostly been in League of Legends or the NBA 2K guys. Esports is such a wider space. Like, when you think of esports and all the titles, like, how wide is that? How's that space and all the different titles that are available?
Well, it's massive. And for those that don't know, ESL is a title agnostic company. So we're essentially a events and content creator. We're kind of like, at times, as well as a league administrator. So we're kind of like Cricket Australia and ESPN together. We can run our own leagues, and then at other times we will do work for hire for publishers to create their events for them. So we're a bit of a mixed bag, but the most important thing for us is that we will never hitch our wagon to just one title. So there are so many different esport titles. So in the last 2 or 3 years, we've probably worked across 15 different esport titles. So I've mentioned some of them. Some on console, Call of Duty, Overwatch, League of Legends, Rainbow Six on the PC, even World of Tanks, all sorts of weird and quirky and unusual titles.
And the more that and it is a bit of, you've got to go down the rabbit hole of all the different titles. One thing I do hear is that the gamers and the audiences of them, they're not all the same. Like, there's some real stark differences, and it must be a real challenge for you as a content producer and an event producer to go, oh, we're rolling out, a Rainbow Six, and there's some nuances that you have to do for those titles.
I've got some great analogies for the sports fans, right? So StarCraft is a 1v1 title. It's been around a long time. It's all about concentration and outwitting your opponent, as well as tactical ability. But a more gentrified, mature audience of fans of StarCraft, I'd liken it to golf. Whereas we've got Counter-Strike, which is a little bit more boisterous, team-oriented, kind of game. We broke a food and beverage record at the Palms in Crown here because of the amount of booze that the guys had ordered. As spectators, it was a great experience. And there's everything in between, right? So you can have audiences that are a little bit more reserved. So in terms of challenges, sometimes, as a broadcaster, you want to create the emotion, and sometimes it can be difficult. Guys are sitting down on the stage, they're playing a game and they're looking at a screen. The most emotive you see the players are when they've just won. And that winning moment, they're holding the trophy up. Sometimes the guys in certain games are so shy they don't want to be on camera necessarily. And that's changing in esports. I think a lot of it is that these players have not been used to it. Whereas you look at the
spotlight is now going on them a little bit more.
Correct. So you're starting to see some real characters and personas come out, a little bit of acting up. Whereas, a 1 minute trophy celebration, the guys hold up the trophy and we're trying to capture that moment, and then they'll put it straight back down. Whereas the AFL, I watched the AFL grand final, those guys can't let go of it. They're celebrating for about 5 hours.
They can do a couple of laps.
Let alone 1 minute.
So it must be frustrating as a content producer. No, celebrate more, guys.
Yeah, celebrate more, guys. Celebrate more.
To slow-mo and stretch this. One of the things yesterday, we attended EGAA, the Electronic Games Association of Australia, if I've got that correct, which you're a founding member of. Why is that important?
So this is a pretty serious topic, Sean. So we're a new and emerging industry, and it's growing so fast. And there's a number of new stakeholders coming into the industry. And the purpose of the EGAA is to create a little bit more structure around the various groups that are in the industry and set a basic level of standards for us to follow and for us to tackle some key issues. And some of these can be really basic issues or things that you wish wouldn't be a problem. So player visas, for example, they're also a way to, or the EGAA, there's an important function for us to try and work together with government to try and solve issues that affect the industry. So, for example, Intel Extreme Masters Sydney this year, a couple of a Ukrainian and a Turkish team had qualified to compete in Sydney, and we couldn't get them in the country in time. Based on the speed in which they could get their visas approved. Whereas if esports was more formally recognised.
If they'd have been a basketball team, it wouldn't have been a problem.
Correct. Correct. So these are kind of some of the things that we need to tackle as an industry. And then in addition to that, there's also some more base level issues that are legacy problems from being a grassroots kind of movement. So we've got...
How do you add that professionalism to the industry?
Player contracts, working together with teams properly, making sure there's a fair set of standards and practices.
And so it is just a matter of having a place where that discussion happens. So it's just not happening in halls and in bars around events like PAX.
Correct,
and
exactly.
So it can have some structure, and you've got to have those conversations with governments, and that's where, when people say, and I'm not getting into the is esports a sport rubbish, right? But that's what sports has done for, that's been a big part of sports administration, is getting in that infrastructure and architecture that it needs to talk to governments and make sure there's some rigor around what you're trying to do, because esports has moved so quickly, in a short amount of time, that hasn't happened yet.
No, that's exactly right. And then who is the right person or the right body to make these moves? Our view is that we need to take an assortment of people and stakeholders from different parts of the industry. So ESL is obviously a tournament organiser, but we don't represent all the interests. We've got teams, players, everybody sort of coming together in one area to create a unified voice when we are creating policy and making an approach towards government.
So I attended yesterday, and it was eclectic mix, because there were people like, well, I'm a gamer, I'm really interested in the space, or I'm a developer and I want to develop a title that might be in esports.
Exactly.
Or, people like Ian Roy looking at, the esports industry from an integrity point of view. What does that mean? Because he knows what happens in that space in sports like cricket and football and stuff like that. So it's sort of like, going through your teenage years, you're starting to mature and you've got to tackle all of those issues, because it is serious.
Yeah, it is. It is serious business, and it's only predicted to get so much bigger in terms of revenue and size and scale. And if we don't get things right in the early days, we'll be in trouble in the future.
Well, exactly. And if you've looked at only in the last maybe 5 weeks, PwC come out with lots of mentions of esports, even if they're spelling it wrong. In their report, it's esports, no dashes, no capital S's, everybody, just for reference. Goldman Sachs did the same. They came out with a big old report with big old capital S. I'm like, no, we don't need that. But like the conversation is starting to happen around growth and revenue and all of that kind of thing. I think last year was my first time coming to PAX and just the craziness that is PAX being a gaming festival, so it's consoles, it's PCs, it's and esports is part of it. And I remember last year standing at the ESL stage chatting to you, and you were showing me this thing. It's like, it's Battle Royale, and everyone just runs around, and it's 100 of them, and one wins. I'm like, yeah, that was Fortnite. It started like a couple of weeks before PAX last year, and now it's got 4 or 5 stages.
It's scary, the pace of change in our industry. Yes.
Yeah, and then the thing is, it's like, does it become, do people want to then play it competitively? Like, do you want to get the best 100 Fortnite players in a room, in a stadium? Who knows? And, that's where the development's happening. So I want to finish with the closing 5 because I know you've got to get back into the madness that is PAX. Do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
Yeah, I can actually. So my father's from WA, he's a massive AFL fan, but moved to Brisbane. So I grew up in Brisbane.
I thought you were going to talk about the Eagles. It still hurts me as a Pies man. Hang on.
Eagles would be my backup team. So I was very happy that the Eagles won, actually, Sean. Sorry, mate.
That's right. I've walked right into that one. But anyway, I interrupted your memory.
So growing up in Brisbane Bears are the first AFL team. I remember being in primary school. Do you remember maybe you don't, but you used to be able to collect the can return. So,
yep.
Soft drink cans, right? This is a very weird story, but my first sports memory was cruising around a Brisbane Bears game, which we held at the Gold Coast.
Did you get 10 cents a can or 5 cents a can in
and
South Australia?
It was a school thing, though, back then. You collected cans and you got some pocket money. It was awesome. But I was so happy to be at that sports match because there were just cans littered everywhere. Yeah. But I did see a bit of the Brisbane team, and then I followed the Lions through the 3 consecutive premierships.
Oh, yeah, well, they beat Collingwood twice. I mean, you're just... I shouldn't have asked this question. But yeah, we'll move on. You would have been... So this is... I normally ask this of people who are going to lots of events and say, do you have a favourite food memory? Like go to especially in the US where they're really upping the gourmet food options. I haven't been to enough esports events to see if they're doing... Do you have a favourite food memory?
No, I've got to go boring here, sorry. Just a plain hot dog with ketchup. That's it. Yeah, it's always a classic.
What's the first app you open in the morning?
It's Slack. Straight on the work Slack, which is where all the messages come in, and being part of a global company, there's always an industry update or something coming through overnight. So that's
you wake up and someone's trying to move the meeting that you woke up for. I love that one. I love that one. Like you're getting up at 6 for a 7 o'clock meeting. You go, can we push it back an hour? I'm like, yeah, I can't snooze my button now. I'm up. Who's someone that you reckon that you follow that you reckon the podcast listeners should follow potentially if they're getting interested in esports? Or
I'm going to give a recommendation that's a little not a person, but an esports update tool. It's called Synopsis, CYNO.
Yeah, I know.
Synopsis. There's a lot of great industry and business knowledge, less about players and
so it's
team results or have you. Yeah, it's an email. It's a weekly email that comes out with the biggest updates in esports business.
Okay. I think it's in my inbox somewhere. I subscribe to a lot of things.
I'll be honest, I subscribed to it and didn't read it for about 3-4 months. And then ever since I started reading it, I'm like, oh, wow, this is where I get all my news.
Okay, Synopsis. Well, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Lastly, and you can answer this as yourself, but also potentially with your ESL hat on and the events and content you're promoting, what social media platform is your MVP?
For us, it's Twitter.
Yep.
And interestingly, it changes in different markets, right? So we're doing a lot of work in Asia at the moment, and I was quite surprised to find in Indonesia it's got to be Instagram, which I likened to fancy filters and black and white stuff. Yep. But for me in Australia and New Zealand, it's got to be Twitter. Most of the gamers are on there, and a lot of global news also comes in through Twitter.
It's been very, very consistent in that Twitter is still a real power platform, and the niche of esports is all over that.
And most of the way we talk to our audience is through social media updates, primarily through Twitter,
So to wrap up, where can people find you on the internet if they want to send you a tweet or reach out to you?
At Nick Vanzetti. Pretty simple.
That's the best way to do it. Well, thank you very much for coming on the pod and taking some time away from the throng of PAX. Good.
I've enjoyed it, especially those Collingwood jokes.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I'm just here to entertain. I'm happy to be here. So thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of PAX.
Thanks very much, Sean.
Cheers.
New workshops on audience, content, distribution, valuation, and pitch following Sports Geek's Digital to Dollars process. Go to digitaltodollars.com.
Thanks again to Nick Vanzetti. You can send him a tweet, Nick, N-I-C-K, Vanzetti, V-A-N-Z, or Z for my American friends, E-double-T-I. You can send him a tweet and ask him a question about esports events or the Melbourne Esports Open or IM. As I said, I went to Melbourne Esports Open, really enjoyed the day and also enjoyed seeing the new fans, the dads, the mums, taking their kids, helping them understand esports as a live event. And I think it's definitely something that will continue to develop. As I said in the opener, Digital to Dollars is going really well. Really looking forward to doing a league-wide workshop with the AFL, the Australian Football League, in November, walking through with the club's executives in the digital space, but also the commercial space, looking at knowing their audience, knowing their content, understanding their distribution, social media and email, and where it all fits, and starting the process of developing a solid rate card. So it will give us the building blocks to develop the pitch and help the digital teams better understand the commercial side of the digital business, and then also have the commercial team understand how to best sell digital and sell the assets that they are building. So if you are a listener and you're in the AFL club space, I'm looking forward to seeing you there. If you want to reach out beforehand, if you've got any questions, please do so. Send me an email, Sean at SportsGeekHQ. I'm really looking forward to running a really engaging session for a whole day in that league setting after running a really successful session in a shorter form at Seat Dallas earlier this year. So looking forward to do that. If it's something that you or your club or your league want to tackle and help your teams drive more revenue from digital and understand the value of their assets, please reach out, or you can check it out at digitaltodollars.com to either check it out or pre-register for the book that will be out in 2019. Until next episode, for those of you who are in Sports Geek Nation, I'm really appreciating the contribution, especially in the weekly AMAs, the Ask Me Anything. For those of you who don't know what an Ask Me Anything is, it sounds a lot like what I just said. We have Sports Geek Nation members. If you're not a member, you can go to sportsgeeknation.com. You can go to sportsgeeknation.com/members area to see who is up every week. And then a member like John McCauley, who did it last week, will put their hand up and say, ask me anything. And in John's case, there was lots of questions around technology and mobile and OTT. And John was really willing to give up his time and his expertise to answer those questions. So they've been really effective. For those of you who don't know your way around Slack, please reach out to myself or Jolie to understand how to use it better. There's multiple channels of conversation happening in the Sports Geek Nation Slack. Simply click on one of the channels, #AMA, and join it. And then you can listen, lurk, and ask questions, join in the conversation. And we've obviously got topics, channels around specific topics, like esports, our discussion today with Nick, sponsorship, technology, digital, social media, and the like. So if you've got a particular area of interest, please join in and contribute. Share what you're doing. We love to see some case studies of what people are doing. or simply comment on what other teams are doing. Recently, there was some good commentary on the Colorado. I think it was one of the Colorado teams that was pretty much went off the tools from a social media point of view for a week. There's some commentary of people on whether they'd done it before and why they'd done it. And so there's a little bit of talking about the industry in there. So if you're not part of Sports Geek Nation, I'd love you to join up. Go to sportsgeeknation.com for more info. And sort of inspired by those AMAs, I'm going to start doing a Q&A style short form podcast. The only thing that I need right now is your questions. I'm trying to figure out the best way and method to collect those questions. I might start doing that in Sports Geek Nation, but I'd love you to go to my page, facebook.com, Sean Callanan Speaks, or on LinkedIn and message me with a question, and I'm going to come out with a new format that will be short form, 6 to 7 minutes, where I answer your questions in a podcast. Hopefully you will enjoy that. I look forward to collating some of the questions now and going to start rolling that out as a weekly podcast. Until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan. Thank you very much to Nick Vanzetti from ESL. Please reach out to him if you want to know more about esports. But until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
Join Sports Geek Nation access to exclusive Slack and Facebook groups with regular Q&A sessions with Sean Callanan. Go to sportsgeeknation.com to join. Need help with your digital rate card? Not sure how to price your assets? Is there a disconnect between digital and commercial? That is where Sean works best, in digital divorce counselor mode. Book a time for a call with Sean to discuss the Sports Geek process. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call. Go to sportsgeekhq.com for more sports digital marketing resources.